My name is Serena Taylor. I'm 34 years old, and last weekend I stood outside my own brother's engagement party, watching everyone celebrate without me. I gave my name at the gate. The staff looked uncomfortable. "Sorry, your name's not on the list." I turned to my mother. She barely looked at me. "You really thought you were invited?" she said. "This is for family only." I didn't flinch. "Then I'll stop pretending I belong," I said, and walked away. Before I take you any further into my story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and subscribe if family betrayal stories like this hit close to home. Because sometimes, the hardest thing isn't being cut out. It's realizing you were never really in. After that night, I drove back to Montana in silence. The highway was empty, just me, the moonlight, and the dull ache in my chest. There were no tears, not anymore. I think I cried all the ones I had years ago. Now it was just numbness, familiar and cold. I pulled into the gravel path leading to my cabin just as the sun was rising behind the pines. My little home sat quietly at the edge of a forest, where the silence didn't hurt, it healed. The porch light still flickered from the timer I forgot to reset, and the air smelled like cedar and frost. This was my space, the only place I'd ever truly belonged. Inside, everything was in order. Books arranged by theme, a teapot still warm from last night, my sketchpad open, half-finished ideas waiting for me. I'm a digital design contractor, logos, web layouts, brand packages. I work remotely, mostly in soft silence, with a playlist of jazz and thunderstorm sounds in the background. People say that sounds lonely, but compared to the noise I grew up with, this is peace. When I was younger, I thought family meant unconditional love, that no matter what, you were seen, heard, held. But in the Taylor household, love came with terms. Unspoken, yes, but always there. Be perfect, be useful, be quiet. My younger brother, Chase, never had to be told. He was charming, athletic, good-looking. Our parents adored him. There were birthday parties with live music, photo shoots for every minor milestone, and endless praise at every family gathering. Me? I was the one behind the camera, the one holding the coats, the one they forgot to pick up from practice. I remember one afternoon in high school, my fever had climbed to 103. I was dizzy, sweating, alone on the bathroom floor. I called out, but no one came. Mom was hosting a campaign luncheon for Dad's re-election, and I wasn't supposed to get sick on important days. That was the first time I realized I was invisible unless I broke something, fixed something, or disappeared entirely. By 24, I had moved across the country. No fight, no goodbye. I packed my car at 3 a.m., left a note on the kitchen table, and never looked back. At first, I tried to stay in touch. Holiday calls, texts on birthdays, but they always sounded distracted, like they were doing me a favor by answering. Eventually, I stopped trying, and strangely, that silence was kinder than the half-hearted conversations I used to beg for. Here, in Montana, I created something of my own. Every shelf, every cup, every color on the wall was mine. I planted wildflowers out back and watched them bloom each spring. I cooked meals from scratch, burned the bread, tried again. I took long walks through the woods with my neighbor's dog Maple, who sometimes waited at my porch just to nap in the sun. No one judged me here. No one measured my worth in comparison to someone else. Still, some nights I'd wake up from a dream where my mother was finally proud of me, where my father told me he missed me, where Chase invited me over just to talk, not to ask for something. But I'd open my eyes and remember where I was, who I was. I'd wrap myself in a blanket, hold a hot cup of tea, and whisper out loud just to hear it. You're safe now. You chose peace. Keep choosing it, because sometimes healing looks like building a quiet life far away from the ones who never saw your value. And sometimes peace is the loudest act of defiance you can make. Growing up in the Taylor household was like living in a carefully staged photograph. Everything was posed, perfect, polished. We had family portraits taken every year, usually around Christmas, matching sweaters, forced smiles. Chase always stood in the middle. I was told to stand slightly behind. "You're taller, honey, it balances the shot," Mom would say. But I knew. I was the background. Chase was the golden child. Our father, Richmond, made no effort to hide it. "He's got leadership in his blood," he'd boast to neighbors, "just like his old man." Mom agreed, of course. She said Chase was a natural, while I was moody or too intense. I didn't know how to be the kind of daughter they wanted. When Chase turned 16, they threw him a backyard bash with a live band, a custom cake, and a rented tent. Neighbors, classmates, family, all there. Dad gave a toast, said he was so proud to have a son like Chase. Mom cried happy tears. That same year, my birthday fell on a Thursday. No party, no card, no mention at breakfast. I waited all day, thinking maybe they were planning a surprise, maybe they remembered, maybe I mattered. At dinner, they argued about a broken sprinkler head. I went to bed early. When I was 13, I made the honor roll 3 quarters in a row. I left the certificate on the kitchen counter, hoping someone would notice. They didn't. But when Chase hit a home run in Little League, there was a banner on the front lawn. I used to wonder if something was wrong with me. If maybe I was too quiet, too serious, not lovable enough. But the truth is, in a family obsessed with appearances, anyone who didn't fit the script was treated like a stain. By the time I reached my 20s, I stopped trying to be part of the story. One night, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases. It was just past midnight. The house was quiet. I remember standing in the hallway looking at the family photo on the wall. Chase front and center, me off to the side, eyes glazed like I already knew how this would end. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Not dramatic, just factual. "I'm leaving, I need space. Please don't call." They didn't. Not for days. Not for weeks. When I finally got a text from Mom, it read, "If you need help paying rent, let us know." No question about why I left. No concern. Just the same transactional tone she always used when she wanted something wrapped up and out of the way. It hurt, of course it did. But it was also freeing. Because once you stop begging people to care about you, you start learning how to care for yourself. That was almost 10 years ago. Sometimes people ask why I never went back. Why I don't attend birthdays, holidays, family reunions. The truth is, I did go back. Emotionally, at least. I returned again and again in my mind, wondering if maybe I was being too harsh. I sent texts, emails, little olive branches, but they always broke them. And eventually, I stopped planting. I built something else instead. A life rooted in solitude, yes, but also in authenticity. And while that may not look impressive in a Christmas card, it's the most real thing I've ever known. Mornings in Montana don't start with alarms. They start with silence. Soft light through the trees. The distant call of birds waking up. The rustle of pine needles brushing against the side of the cabin. My cabin. I usually rise just before 6. Not because I have to, but because I want to. There's something sacred about the quiet before the world begins to move. I wrap myself in a worn flannel robe, brew tea, always loose leaf, never rushed, and sit by the window with my journal. Every morning I write 3 things: what I feel, what I fear, and what I'm grateful for. Some days the fear is loud. Other days the gratitude wins. I never shared this routine with anyone before. It's not flashy, it won't go viral, but it keeps me tethered, keeps me honest. After journaling, I meditate. Not for long, 15 minutes maybe. I light a candle, close my eyes, and try to sit with whatever shows up. Sometimes it's peace. Sometimes it's a memory I wish would leave me alone. But either way, I let it pass through like weather. I remind myself, storms are temporary. Then I cook. Not always well, but with intention. I chop slowly, measure carefully. There's something powerful about feeding yourself, especially when no one else is watching. I try new recipes every Sunday. Last week it was spiced lentil stew. Too much cumin. I'll adjust next time. Some mornings I walk. There's a trail that loops through the woods behind my place. I take it when the fog is still hanging low, when the world feels like it's holding its breath. I walk slowly, deliberately. Sometimes I bring a thermos. Sometimes I bring company. Maple, my neighbor's retriever, has a habit of showing up uninvited. She's old, gentle, always wagging. She doesn't ask for anything, just walks beside me like she knows silence isn't something to be filled. I didn't plan to live like this, but it's the life I built, one decision at a time. No traffic, no inbox full of emergencies, no schedule dictated by someone else's expectations. Just me, a laptop, and clients I work with remotely. Small businesses mostly. Artists, boutique shops, nonprofits. I help them build websites, design branding, create digital spaces that reflect who they are. Ironically, I've spent years helping people tell their stories while keeping mine tightly locked away. But in this quiet little life I've carved out, I've begun to understand something I never did before. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't show up with confetti or applause. It doesn't look like revenge or victory. Sometimes freedom is choosing what to cook for dinner, saying no without guilt, taking a walk because your body asks you to, not because someone else told you to burn calories. Sometimes it's sitting in silence and realizing for the first time in your life you're not afraid of it. There are still hard days. Memories don't always stay where you put them, but they come less often now. And when they do, I meet them like old ghosts, not with fear, but with curiosity, because here in this quiet corner of the world, I'm not surviving anymore. I'm becoming. One of the best things about small towns is that eventually everyone becomes familiar, even if you never exchanged names. But Nina didn't wait for that to happen. She showed up on my porch the first week I moved in, holding a basket of plums and a suspiciously stern face. "You rentin' or buyin'?" she asked without so much as a hello. "Buying," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Good. Renters don't plant anything." Then she handed me the basket, turned, and walked away. That was our first conversation. Turns out Nina lives 3 cabins over, has lived there for 35 years, and knows the soil like it's family. She grows dahlias the size of dinner plates and talks to them like they're children. I once asked if she'd always been into gardening. She gave me a look like I'd asked whether the sky had always been blue. Nina is blunt, wise, and allergic to small talk, which is probably why I trust her. Some evenings she brings over cuttings from her garden or a jar of jam she says turned out less awful than last year's. She never stays long. We sit on the porch, sip tea, and talk about birds, books, or how the tomatoes are dying because the soil's too proud this year. She never asks about my past. She just shows up, and sometimes that's more powerful than any question. Then there's Eli. I met him through work. He's a freelance developer based out of Oregon, and we collaborate on web projects from time to time. Our first few emails were strictly professional, efficient, dry. Then one day he replied to a feedback note with a meme of a cat typing furiously and the subject line, "Me on deadline." I laughed out loud, the first real laugh in weeks. Since then, he's become my unexpected lifeline. We chat during lunch breaks, trade playlists, send each other ridiculous animal videos. He always asks how I'm sleeping, never pushes when I say, "not great," and knows exactly when to change the subject to something like sourdough starters or the worst fonts ever invented. We've never met in person, but somehow he feels more present than most people I've known. Last month, he sent me a postcard with a single sentence. "Don't forget, quiet is allowed to be joyful too." I stuck it on the fridge. Sometimes we do group calls, me, Eli, and Nina, though Nina pretends she doesn't understand technology, just so she can roast us about using those little glowing rectangles all day. One Sunday afternoon, the 3 of us sat in Nina's backyard, sharing warm apple pie and stories about our worst jobs. Eli, through video call, confessed he once wore a banana costume for a smoothie chain. Nina said nothing topped the time she sold funerary urns over the phone. I told them about the time I interned for a lifestyle magazine and was tasked with writing 1,000 words about the healing power of Himalayan salt lamps, without using the word salt. We laughed until we cried, and for a moment, I forgot I ever missed anything. No one asked why I left Boston. No one brought up birthdays or bloodlines. They didn't need to. Because these people, this mismatched little trio, offered me something I never had with my own family. Presence, acceptance, ease. Not because I was useful, not because I performed, but because I existed. And sometimes that's all we really need. Every Sunday at 4 p.m., my phone rings. The screen lights up with one word. Margot. Not grandma, not great-grandma, just Margot. She insisted. She's 87 years old and sharp as a blade. Lives alone in a creaky Victorian house in Colorado with a cat named Rufus and a garden full of stubborn herbs. She's the kind of woman who drinks bourbon in a teacup and swears when she forgets where she put her glasses, only to find them on her head. She's also the only person in my entire family who ever saw me. When I left Boston, she didn't ask for explanations. She just mailed me a box of chamomile tea, a pair of hand-knit socks, and a note that read, "Good girl. When things burn down, you plant something new." Our calls are short, 15-20 minutes max, but they carry more warmth than any holiday dinner I can remember. Sometimes we talk about small things, how her basil is dying, what she thinks of Eli's latest playlist, the fact that Rufus knocked over a jar of buttons and she swears he did it out of spite. Other times we sit in silence together. Not awkward silence, The kind that only exists between people who don't need to prove anything. Every once in a while, she'll say something out of the blue, something that slices through me, like last month. I was talking about a freelance client who tried to lowball me. Again, I said, maybe I'm just not worth what I think I am. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Darlin', your worth isn't up for discussion, especially not by someone who signs your check." Another time I told her how Chase had posted a picture from a family barbecue. Everyone was there, smiling, laughing. The caption said, "Nothing like family." She didn't hesitate. "You can put lipstick on a ghost, but it's still dead." I burst out laughing, then cried for 20 minutes after we hung up. Margot never sugarcoats anything, but she never judges either. She remembers how it felt to be the black sheep, even if no one called it that in her time. She told me once, "My mother used to say I was too opinionated for a girl. I left home at 19 and never looked back. People thought I was cold. I wasn't cold. I was just done explaining myself." That sentence lives in my bones now. Sometimes I think she and I are the only two women in our family who broke the pattern, the only ones who decided being tolerated wasn't enough. The rest of them are still playing roles, smiling for the camera, keeping secrets under silk dresses, measuring each other's worth by who's invited to what. Margot doesn't play. She plants, she builds, she speaks plainly. And every time I hang up after one of our calls, I feel a little steadier. Not healed, but anchored. There's something powerful about knowing even one person in this world sees you clearly and loves you anyway. Not in spite of who you are, but because of it. It happened on a Tuesday. I had just finished a client call and was chopping carrots for soup when my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on a towel, glanced at the screen, and froze. Dad. All caps. 3 letters. It felt like a punch to the ribs. I hadn't seen that name on my phone in 3 years, not since I left Boston, not since I stopped trying. For a moment I thought it was a mistake, a pocket dial, or maybe a spam call using his old number. But no, his name was still saved exactly how I left it. I never changed it, never deleted it. Maybe I wanted the reminder. I let it ring, once, twice. My thumb hovered over the red button. I was about to decline when something in me shifted. I answered. "Hello?" There was a pause, like he hadn't expected me to pick up. Then, the unmistakable voice of Richard Taylor, measured, crisp, just slightly annoyed, cut through. "Serena, it's Dad." As if I wouldn't recognize him. As if the sound of that voice hadn't been embedded in my bones for decades. "I need you to come home this weekend," he said. "Chase is getting engaged. We're hosting a party. Family is expected to be there." No hello. No how are you. No acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken since I left. Just a directive. Like I was still living under his roof. Like the years of silence were just a scheduling error. I kept my voice steady. "I already have plans." He didn't miss a beat. "Change them." It wasn't a request. It never was with him. "I can't," I said. There was another pause. Then, colder this time, he added, "You should think about what message your absence sends." I almost laughed. The irony of that sentence. Before I could reply, he ended the call. No goodbye, no closing words, just a flat line and the low buzz of disconnection. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in hand, carrots untouched. Then the text started. Not from him, from her. "Mom. I heard you refused to come. Do you understand how selfish that looks? Chase deserves a full family there. You're ruining his moment. Why do you always make everything about you?" I stared at the screen. My stomach churned. I turned off the stove, stepped outside. The cold hit my face like a slap, but it was grounding. I stood barefoot in the snow-dusted grass, just breathing. It's strange how one phone call can unravel years of distance, how fast the old script returns. You become that child again, guilty, anxious, desperate to explain. But I didn't reply, not right away. Instead, I called Margot. She picked up on the second ring. I didn't even say hello, just whispered, "He called." She didn't ask which he. She knew. There was a pause. Then she said, "And how did it feel?" "Like I was being summoned," I said. "Like nothing's changed." She sighed. "They don't call to reconnect, honey. They call to reel you back in. Don't confuse the hook for a hug." I let that sink in. Because somewhere inside me, some part still wanted to be invited. Not out of obligation, but because I mattered. Some part of me still hoped for recognition, but hoping for things from people who refuse to see you only leads to disappointment. And this time, I wasn't ready to betray myself just to make the picture look whole. The next morning, I found myself staring at my phone like it was some kind of detonator. The missed call was still there. No voicemail, just the name, Dad. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't owe anyone a response. But something in me, the part that still craved order, still feared being difficult, was humming with static. By noon, I gave in and called him back. It rang once. He answered with a clipped, "Serena." No warmth, no space for small talk. "I already told you, this weekend. Saturday at 4, the Taylor house, dress appropriately." Just like that. No invitation, no conversation, just a directive, delivered like a corporate memo. "I told you yesterday," I replied calmly. "I have plans." A sharp exhale, not quite a sigh, more like irritation dressed as patience. "You need to prioritize family. Chase is getting engaged. This is a milestone. People will notice if you're not there." There it was. People will notice. The true concern. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Instead, I said, "I haven't been part of that family for a long time." There was a pause, and then his voice turned colder. "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" "You're making a scene over nothing. This is your brother's moment. Not everything has to be about you." I bit the inside of my cheek. Hard. "I'm not making it about me," I said. "I'm just not coming." That was the end of it. No further questions, no attempt at understanding. He simply said, "Suit yourself," and hung up. I stood there holding the deadline, the old ache rising like smoke from a fire I thought I'd smothered years ago. Later that evening, the text started again. Mom this time. "I raised you better than this. Why do you always ruin everything? You've become so cold, so bitter." And then the kicker, "Don't let your name be erased from the will." Ah, there it was, the family currency. It was never about connection. It was always about control. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window at the snow melting on the pine branches. I could see Maple, the neighbor's retriever, sniffing around for buried sticks. The world outside my window was soft, still, honest. The world inside that phone, conditional, calculated. A memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was 10. I had the flu, fever, chills, the whole thing. I stayed in bed with a bucket beside me, too weak to move. Mom was hosting a fundraiser downstairs, loud laughter, clinking glasses. I remember calling for her. She came in once, brought me water, told me not to make a scene if I heard guests arriving. Then she left. I threw up alone that night, curled in my own bed, burning up, wondering if this was what love looked like in our house. Apparently it was. Obedience over comfort, silence over needs, appearances over care. That's the foundation I was raised on. I thought I'd built a new house, a new identity, one far from theirs. But it turns out some foundations follow you. And all it takes is one phone call to feel the weight of it again. I wanted to run. I wanted to text Margot and ask her what to do. But instead, I did something else. I lit a candle, I sat down, I opened my journal, and I wrote, "He called. He commanded. I declined." And this time, I didn't shake. The next morning, I woke up to 6 new messages, all from her. "You're being spiteful. This is a family event. Stop making it about yourself. I don't know what I did to deserve this kind of treatment from my own daughter. Your absence will be noticed. It's embarrassing. Chase is heartbroken. Don't expect your name to remain in the family trust if you keep choosing distance over loyalty." I stared at the screen, not sure whether to laugh or scream. Chase is heartbroken? Over what? Me not applauding his engagement party like a paid actor? And loyalty? That word doesn't mean what she thinks it means. In our family, loyalty meant silence. Loyalty meant smiling for holiday cards and never mentioning how you cried yourself to sleep. It meant sitting through dinner while someone mocked your dreams and then being told you were too sensitive when you flinched. It meant swallowing hurt, year after year, and calling it love. I used to think my mother didn't know how deeply she hurt me, but now I think she did. She just didn't care enough to stop. I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, coffee in hand, phone screen glowing in the early light. My breath fogged in front of me, and somewhere in the woods a hawk called out, sharp and lonely. The messages weren't surprising. They were predictable, almost rehearsed, but somehow they still landed like punches. Because there's a difference between knowing you're no longer welcome and having someone spell it out. line by line, in a font you recognize. I didn't reply. But the silence didn't stop the memory flood. I was 17 when I told Mom I wanted to study design. She blinked slowly and said, "That's a hobby, not a career." Dad didn't even look up from his paper. They had other plans, law school or maybe something in politics. I didn't fit their blueprint. Never did. When I got my first paid freelance gig in college, I printed out the invoice and left it on the kitchen counter, hoping they'd see I could make something of myself on my own terms. Mom saw it all right. She circled the total with a red pen and wrote, "Don't get used to this." When I finally left at 24, I wasn't running away. I was walking toward silence, the kind that didn't judge me, the kind that let me breathe without holding my stomach in, the kind that felt more like home than any house I ever lived in. But even now, years later, with a life I built from the ground up, one message from her could stir the dust of doubt. That's the thing about emotional wounds. They remember the shape of the knife. I took another sip of coffee, cold now, bitter, still grounding. Then, as if summoned by instinct, Maple padded up the porch steps and sat beside me. No leash, no expectations, just presence. She rested her head on my knee and sighed the way only dogs can, full-bodied and honest. And for a moment, I let myself feel the weight of everything, the texts, the past, the truth, that I was never the daughter she wanted, only the one she tolerated, until I stopped making it easy for her. But here's what she never counted on: that I would learn to live without her approval, that I would stop measuring my worth in invitations or inheritance or birthday calls that never came, that I would choose peace, even if it meant choosing myself over them, especially if it meant that. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the lights off, the blanket pulled to my chin, staring at the ceiling like it might hold some kind of answer. The words from my mother's messages played on a loop in my head. "You're being spiteful. Chase is heartbroken. Don't expect your name to remain in the trust." It wasn't just manipulation, it was familiarity, the kind that slips under your skin because you were raised on it. At 3:12 a.m., I got up, wrapped myself in my robe, and went to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water but didn't drink it, just stood there, holding it, while a memory came back, uninvited and vivid. I was 11. I'd come down with the flu, fever of 104. My body ached so badly I could barely move. I remember lying on the couch, shivering despite the blankets, and calling for my mom. She came into the room, phone tucked between her ear and shoulder, clearly annoyed. "I can't do this right now, Serena. I've got donors arriving in 20 minutes. She tossed a bottle of cold medicine onto the table, turned on the TV, and left. I threw up 5 minutes later, alone. No one came. I cleaned it up myself with shaking hands and a dish towel that smelled like bleach. The next day, she told everyone I was faking it for attention. I hadn't thought about that day in years, but now it bloomed in my chest like a bruise that never healed. That's the part no one sees when they say things like, "But she's your mother." They don't see the way she made me feel like an inconvenience in my own home. They don't hear the way she weaponized disappointment, how she could twist silence into a punishment more effective than yelling. And yet, there's still that part of me. The part that thinks maybe this time I've gone too far. That maybe I should just go to the party, smile politely, keep the peace. Because isn't that what daughters do? I sat on the floor, my back against the cabinet, glass of water untouched beside me. My heart felt heavy, like it had soaked up every guilt-soaked word I'd been fed since childhood. I reached for my phone and scrolled until I found her name, Margot. It was late, but she answered on the second ring, same as always. "Something's on fire, or you wouldn't be calling this late," she said, voice gravelly but kind. I didn't respond right away. Then finally I whispered, "I think I'm the fire." She paused. "No, honey. You're just the first one who stopped pretending there wasn't smoke." I closed my eyes. I feel like I'm being punished for not showing up, but every time I did show up before, I was invisible. That's because they don't want you seen. Not really. They want you silent. There's a difference. I keep wondering if maybe I'm being selfish. She let out a quiet laugh. "Oh, Serena, that's the trick, you know. Make the strong one feel selfish for finally saying no. That way they'll crawl right back and apologize for having boundaries." My throat tightened. "I just don't want to carry it anymore." "You don't have to," she said. "Let them carry their own mess for once. You've been sweeping after them your whole life." Silence sat between us for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like an exhale. "I'm proud of you," Margot said softly. My eyes welled, unexpected and sharp. "I haven't done anything." "You said no," she replied. "In that family, that's a revolution." I stayed on the line a few more minutes, breathing in the sound of her voice like oxygen. When we hung up, I stood in the quiet kitchen, the shadows soft around me, and whispered to no one, "Not this time." Not because I was angry, not even because I wanted revenge, but because I finally knew what my peace was worth. The next morning, I woke up clear. Not happy, not relieved, but clear. There's a difference. It's the kind of clarity that comes after a long, brutal storm, the kind where trees fall and power lines snap. You wake up to wreckage, but also air that tastes cleaner than it did the day before. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check for more messages. I didn't look at the calendar to see how many days were left until the party. I made tea. I opened the window. I let the cold air touch my face. Then I sat down at my desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and started writing. Yes, actual paper. Not an email, not a text. There's something sacred about putting ink to page when you're reclaiming yourself. I wrote slowly, carefully, not because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing, but because I wanted every word to be mine. Not performative, not apologetic, just mine. Dear Mom and Dad, thank you for the invitation. I won't be attending Chase's engagement party. I wish him well, and I'm glad he has your full support as he builds his life. As for me, I've chosen to build something different. Not out of spite, not out of rebellion, but out of self-preservation. The family I grew up with didn't see me. The woman I am now refuses to stay invisible. Please don't contact me again unless it's with respect and sincerity. I no longer have space for anything else. Serena, no fluff, no explanation, no open doors for more manipulation. I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, stamped it, walked it to the mailbox at the end of my driveway, and let it go with the firm push of the flag. Then I stood there a moment. The wind was sharp, the sky low with gray. Maple barked in the distance, chasing a squirrel that always outran her. I didn't cry, I didn't second guess. Instead, I felt something shift in my chest. A kind of loosening. Like I'd been wearing a too-tight dress for years and had finally stepped out of it. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop and cleared my inbox of every email with the subject line family, every calendar event with the word Taylor, every draft I'd written and rewritten trying to explain myself to people who never listened in the first place. Delete, 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 and still no tears. Because there comes a point where grief burns down into resolve, when the ache turns into steel, and you realize this is not cruelty, this is survival. That evening, I called Margot again. "Did you send it?" she asked before I even said hello. "I did." A beat. "How did it feel?" I paused. "Like shutting a door that never had a doorknob on my side anyway." She cackled. "That's a hell of a metaphor." I've had time to think. "Well," she said, voice warm, "welcome to the part of your life where you stop waiting for their version of you to make sense, and you start living the one you actually built." We didn't talk long. We never do. But when I hung up, the silence felt different. Not empty, spacious. Like something new could grow in it. That night I slept. Not just tossed and turned or drifted in and out. I slept. Deep, dreamless, and still. When I woke up, the world felt sharper. The light spilling through the windows looked like it had something to say. My tea tasted fuller, the heat of it reaching parts of me that had been numb for years. This was what clarity felt like. Not euphoria, not fireworks, just quiet certainty. The kind of peace that comes when you finally stop rehearsing what you'll say if they call again. Because you know now, they probably won't. And even if they do, you're no longer interested in auditioning for a role that never fit. I spent the day doing small things. I cleaned the fridge, I refolded my sweaters, I took Maple for a walk down the long trail behind the lake, the one I used to avoid because it reminded me of conversations I never had. But this time, I let myself go slow. I watched the trees sway in the breeze, the way their branches arched like arms stretching after a long sleep. I kicked pine cones down the path. I didn't check my phone. The world didn't end without me glued to it. Later I baked. A real pie, from scratch. Nina had dropped off fresh apples a few days earlier, insisting I do something proper with them, not just let them rot in a bowl like modern women do. So I peeled, sliced, seasoned. I even made the crust by hand the old way, cold butter, flour, fingertips, no shortcuts. It felt ridiculous and perfect. I didn't bake often, but when I did, it was always for someone else. A dinner party, a holiday, a gesture of apology. But this one? This was just for me. When it came out of the oven, golden and steaming, I laughed. Actually laughed. Because no one was watching, no one was waiting, no one was grading my performance. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be mine. I took a slice out to the porch, wrapped in a towel, and watched the sun dip low behind the ridge. The sky turned to fire, orange, then pink, then a dusky blue that always makes me feel like I'm living in a painting. And I thought, so this is what it feels like. Not freedom exactly, not yet. But the beginning of it, the breath before the song, the space before the first step. I didn't feel brave. I felt relieved. Not because I'd cut them off, but because for the first time in years, I hadn't betrayed myself to keep someone else comfortable. There's something sacred in that. It's not loud. It doesn't come with applause, but it hums under your skin like truth. That night, I lit a candle, opened my journal, and wrote 2 words across the page, still standing. Then I closed it. And for once, I didn't need to explain anything more. The morning of Chase's engagement party arrived with a quiet sky and a chill that hinted at early spring. I knew the house in Boston would be buzzing by now. Florists unpacking centerpieces, photographers testing angles, my mother directing staff like a general before a royal wedding, and Chase, probably smiling for cameras like he was born to do it. Maybe he was. But me? I made coffee, laced up my hiking boots, and packed a peanut butter sandwich. No dress, no RSVP, no mask to wear today. Just me, the trail, and the soft promise of solitude. There's a ridge about 30 minutes from my cabin, a gentle climb that leads to a quiet overlook above a glassy lake. It's not a hard hike, but it makes you sweat just enough to remind you that your body is still working. Still carrying you forward, even when the rest of you feels like it's unraveling. I hadn't been up there in over a year. Maybe I was saving it for a day like this. Halfway through the trail, I paused to breathe. The air was clean. Pine-scented, sharp. A squirrel darted across the path, tail flicking like a comma in motion. A hawk circled above me, wings stretched like it owned the sky. And maybe it did. Everything around me was alive, unconcerned with family legacies, trust funds, or who did or didn't show up. I took my time. At the top, I laid out a blanket and sat by the edge of the overlook. The lake below was still, like it had taken a vow of silence for the day. No ripples, no wind, just sky, reflected perfectly on the water. I pulled out my journal, opened it to a fresh page, and without much thought wrote, "Today, I'm not the daughter who disappointed, not the sister who disappeared, not the woman who ruins perfect pictures. Today, I'm just Serena, and that's enough." I let the sun warm my face as I chewed my sandwich and watched the world exist without needing me to perform. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty for taking up space. Didn't feel selfish for choosing my own peace. Didn't feel invisible. Because here, in this place, I wasn't a shadow cast by someone else's spotlight. I was just here. Fully. Quietly. Alive. That evening, my phone rang. It was Margot. I was still sitting on the porch watching the last light slide behind the trees. I answered, already knowing what the call was about. "Well," she said, no preamble. "They pulled out all the stops." I could hear a faint clinking of glasses in the background, distant music, laughter that didn't quite reach her voice. "It's a circus," she added. "Gold chairs, champagne towers, a live quartet. Your mother looks like she's running for Senate." I smiled, picturing it. "How's the bride?" "Polite, stiff, pretty dress though. Lace sleeves, very classic New England money. You know the type." She took a breath, then said it without warning. "They asked about you." My hand froze on my mug. "Who?" "The bride's mother. Right in the middle of the toast. She leaned over and said, 'I thought Chase had a sister?'" I could hear the amusement in Margot's voice now. Dry, sharp. "And your mom. God bless her." She froze like someone asked her to recite the Constitution in Russian. Then she smiled tight and high and said, "Serena had other obligations." I didn't say anything. Margot filled the silence. After that, the air shifted, just slightly. You could feel it, like someone opened a window during a staged photo. That image struck me. A room full of people smiling, hands perfectly placed, champagne flutes tilted just so, and then, somewhere in the background, A breeze kicks in and ruins the hair. Not enough to undo the whole picture. Just enough to show it was never real. "She's rattled," Margot said. "They all are. Even your dad looked, I don't know, not angry, just off balance." That surprised me. My father doesn't get off balance. He creates the balance and demands everyone fall in line. But maybe that's the thing about control. Once someone stops responding to it, the whole system starts to fray. "You did the right thing, kid," she added, her voice softening. "I know," I said. And I did. Still, something inside me stirred. Not guilt, not regret, just acknowledgement. That even absence has weight. That not showing up can echo louder than being there and saying nothing. I pictured them all gathered under strings of fairy lights, clinking glasses, making toasts about legacy and love. Posing for perfect pictures while avoiding the empty space at the edge of every frame. And maybe, just maybe, someone wondering if that space was meant for me. Margot sighed. "Anyway, I'm heading out. These people drink too much and talk too loud. I'd rather be watching old westerns with a cup of tea." I smiled again. "Thanks for calling." "Of course. Someone had to tell you the truth. Besides," she added, "I like reminding you that you matter, especially when they go out of their way to pretend you don't." When we hung up, I sat in the dark for a while, letting her words settle. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the forgotten child. I felt like the choice they didn't get to make. Later that night, after I washed the dishes and turned down the lights, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in hand. I didn't open any new messages. I didn't check social media for photos of the party. Instead, I tapped on my call log, scrolled to Margot's number, and hit play on the voicemail she'd left earlier, right before we spoke. It was short, a whisper of a message, but I played it twice anyway. "Just so you know," she said, "your absence tonight? It said more than you ever could have with words." That line echoed in my room, soft and steady. I laid back on the pillow, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me, and let it repeat in my mind like a mantra. Your absence said more. She was right, because I could have gone. I could have smiled and stood at the edge of family photos waiting to be cropped out later. I could have let Mom pretend we were close, while she whispered apologies about my moods to whoever asked why I looked so stiff. I could have played the part, again, but I didn't. I stayed home, and somehow that one choice rewrote everything. It told them I wasn't afraid anymore, not of being forgotten, not of being disapproved of, not even of losing whatever scraps of inheritance they used to dangle like bait. It told them I knew what I was worth now, and I didn't need a seat at their table to prove it. Funny how silence can be louder than confrontation, how not showing up can rattle a room that once ignored you when you were right there in it. I got up, opened the window, and let the cool air roll across my face. The stars were scattered, clear and bold, the kind of night sky you never see from city rooftops or country clubs lit with fairy lights. And standing there, barefoot on the wooden floor, arms folded, I felt something shift again. Not just relief this time, but something like reclamation. I wasn't just absent tonight. I was present somewhere else. I was here, in a home I chose, wrapped in a life I built, surrounded by people who didn't need me to be perfect, just real. People like Margot, and maybe Nina and Eli, and maybe, someday, more. Because when you stop chasing the version of love you were trained to accept, you leave space for something more honest to find you. Even if it starts small, even if it's just you, a quiet porch, and the memory of someone finally seeing your worth. I closed the window, climbed back into bed, and before turning off the light, I whispered aloud, not to anyone in particular, but just to the air, to myself. They noticed, and that's enough. The next morning, I sat on the porch with my second cup of coffee, wrapped in an old flannel blanket Nina had given me last fall. The air was cool and quiet, still holding the hush of a world not quite awake. Maple lay at my feet, tail flicking occasionally as birds darted past the railing. Everything around me felt still. Not frozen, not lifeless, just intentionally still, like the world had agreed to pause with me. I picked up my phone and opened a message Margot had sent late the night before. Just a photo. It was blurry, clearly taken in a rush, but I knew the moment instantly. A shot of the wedding party all lined up in front of the venue's grand staircase. Everyone was smiling. Chase had his arm around his fiancée. My parents were standing close, Too close, as if proximity could erase discomfort. But the space on the far right, the space where I would have stood, was noticeably empty. It wasn't cropped out. It wasn't filled in. It just remained, visible, unmissable. And that was the moment I smiled, not out of satisfaction, not because I won something. That's not what this was. I smiled because for the first time they had to feel my absence. Because when I was there, I was easy to ignore, easy to use, easy to position like a prop, then pack away until the next holiday required my smile. But without me, they couldn't quite complete the picture. And it wasn't petty. It wasn't revenge. It was just truth, finally visible. I stared at that photo a long time, not to dwell, not to ache, but to remember. To remember what it looks like when you stop shrinking to fit into places that don't want you whole. And that photo, of all things, was my confirmation. I closed my phone and leaned back in the chair. The sun had started to rise higher, warming my cheeks, making the steam rise from my cup again. I felt calm, like I didn't need to run anymore, didn't need to explain myself to people committed to misunderstanding me, didn't need to chase invitations or hold on to traditions that had always excluded me at the soul level. I was done performing, done waiting, done hoping someone would finally say, "You were enough all along." Because now, I knew it, and I didn't need them to say it for it to be true. I took a sip of coffee. It was strong and bitter and exactly the way I liked it, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was missing anything, because I wasn't. They were. They just didn't know it yet. It's strange how quiet freedom can be. No marching bands, no confetti, no one clapping you on the back and saying, "You did it." Just a moment, sometime after the dust settles, when you realize you're not bracing for the next hit anymore. That moment came for me about a month after the wedding. It was a Thursday. I was standing in front of a little A-frame cabin on the edge of a tree line, holding a key in one hand and a box of mismatched mugs in the other. The real estate agent had already driven off. The paperwork was signed. The place was mine. It wasn't fancy. The roof needed some love, the porch sagged a little, and there was a family of squirrels living in the attic who weren't thrilled about the eviction notice, but it was mine. Mine to fix. Mine to paint. Mine to sit in and breathe without being told I was too much or too quiet or not trying hard enough. The first night, I didn't unpack. I ordered pizza, sat on the hardwood floor with Maple curled next to me, and listened to the wind push through the pine trees. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi. No noise but the creaking of wood and the occasional distant howl of something wild. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't lonely. I was alone, but not lonely. There's a difference. The next few days were a blur of sweat and paint. I picked colors that made me feel something. Soft moss green for the kitchen, warm amber for the bedroom, white with a hint of blue for the little sunroom that caught the morning light just right. I played old records while I painted. Ella Fitzgerald, Nina Simone, Patsy Cline. I sang out loud. Off-key, no one complained. Nina came by one afternoon with a basket of cookies and a box of tools. "Thought you might need both," she said, handing me a hammer with a pink ribbon tied to the handle. We laughed for an hour, fixing the loose railing on the porch, sipping lemonade between turns. Later that week, Eli drove up from Missoula. He brought coffee beans, 3 houseplants, and a playlist he'd made just for the occasion called Fresh Start Vibes. We sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and basil plants, talking about everything and nothing. It was simple, and it was sacred, because healing doesn't always look like therapy sessions or dramatic revelations. Sometimes it looks like finally hanging curtains you actually like. Sometimes it's knowing the only name on the mailbox is yours. Sometimes it's choosing a crooked bookshelf because it makes you smile. I built routines slowly. Morning walks with Maple, coffee on the porch, writing in my journal before bed. I started cooking again, really cooking, not just throwing things in a pan to survive the day. I roasted vegetables, I baked bread, I burned a few meals and laughed instead of crying, and every time I opened a drawer and found something familiar, a spoon from the old apartment, a photo I wasn't ready to part with, I asked myself a question. Does this still belong to the life I'm building? Sometimes the answer was yes, sometimes it wasn't. And little by little, the space shaped itself around who I was becoming, not who I had been asked to be. No more pretending, no more shrinking, just quiet ownership of a life that finally felt like mine. It had been exactly 33 days since I moved into the cabin when I hosted my first dinner. I use the word hosted loosely. There were no place cards, no wine pairings, no formal invites, just a group text that said, "Bring whatever you're craving, I'll have the oven on." Nina arrived first, holding a pie she insisted wasn't homemade, but somehow still warm from the oven. "This is either the best store in Montana," I said, lifting the foil, "or you're a liar." She gave me a look. "I've been called worse." Eli showed up 20 minutes later with a mismatched basket of groceries, bread, cheese, 3 pears, and something he referred to only as experimental dip. We lit a few candles, though it wasn't for ambiance. The kitchen light had shorted out earlier that day, and I hadn't figured out the breaker panel yet. But under that flickering glow, something came alive in the room. Laughter bounced off the walls. Maple begged for scraps and got more than she deserved. We passed plates, spilled wine, and never once paused to pose or perform. At one point, Eli said, "You realize this is your first housewarming, right? Your actual first." I hadn't thought about it. All the places before had felt temporary, boxes I never fully unpacked, rooms I decorated with restraint, just in case I had to leave. But this time was different. I had picked every fork, every paint color, every imperfect wooden chair around the table. And the people in those chairs? They weren't here because they had to be. They were here because they wanted to be. That mattered. Halfway through dessert, my phone buzzed. It was a video call from Margot. I answered, walking out onto the porch, letting the night air wrap around me like a second skin. She was in her usual spot, worn armchair, cup of tea in hand, a shawl draped over her shoulders like royalty who didn't care much for formality. "You look happy," she said, peering at me through the screen. "I think I might be," I admitted. There was a pause. Then she said it, soft, certain, no drama. This is your family now." The words landed gently, not like a verdict. More like a truth I'd been circling for years but hadn't dared to name. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. Instead, I tilted the phone to show her the candlelit table behind me. Nina was laughing at something Eli said. He was gesturing wildly with a piece of bread in hand. The dog had her head on someone's knee, angling for more attention. Margot watched in silence for a moment. Then she smiled. "Yeah, that looks about right." We didn't say much after that, just held the connection. Sometimes love doesn't need a lot of words. It just needs to be witnessed. I went back inside, slid into my seat, and topped off everyone's glasses. There was no toast, no big speech, just clinking glasses, bites of pie, and the quiet miracle of being surrounded by people who didn't ask me to prove my worth. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I stood in the middle of my kitchen and looked around. The floor was sticky. There were crumbs everywhere. Someone had left their sweater draped over the back of a chair, and I couldn't stop smiling. Because this mess, this noise, this love, it was mine, and it was more than enough. The next morning, I woke up to birdsong and the smell of pine drifting through the open window. I stayed in bed longer than usual, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to memorize the feeling of waking up in a life that didn't hurt, no tension in my chest, no invisible to-do list from people I could never please, just breath, sunlight, and quiet. That was the day I decided to do the last hard thing. I picked up my phone, scrolled through the contacts, and deleted every number that made my stomach clench. Mom, Dad, Chase, even a couple of cousins who only texted when they needed gossip or favors. Then I called the carrier and changed my number. It took less than 10 minutes. I stared at the confirmation screen when it was done, expecting to feel nervous, exposed, cut off. But I didn't. I felt clean. Like I'd just stepped out of a hot shower after scrubbing off years of someone else's story. I spent the rest of the day going through boxes I hadn't touched since the move. They were mostly things I'd kept out of guilt. Photos, holiday cards, old gifts I never liked but felt too afraid to throw away. There was a birthday card from my mother, dated 3 years ago. The message inside was generic, almost formal. "Hope you are well. Please remember your brother's graduation is next week. We need you there." No love, no warmth, just obligation in cursive. I put it in the burn pile. One by one, the items followed. A sweater my dad gave me that still smelled faintly of his cologne. A silver picture frame with no picture inside. A box of notes from a time when I still believed showing up would earn me something back. I built a small fire pit out back with some stones I found near the creek. It wasn't fancy, but it did the job. I didn't make a ritual out of it. No dramatic music, no tears. Just me, standing under a sky turning gold with late afternoon light, feeding old memories to the flames. They curled and cracked and disappeared piece by piece until there was nothing left but embers. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't mourning anymore. I was clearing space. For what, I didn't know yet. But it felt like breathing room. Like finally having a drawer that isn't stuffed with things you can't explain. When I walked back inside, my hands smelled like smoke and my heart felt strangely light. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my journal, and wrote 2 words. Let go. I didn't write anything else. I didn't have to. Some endings don't need punctuation, they just need space to echo. Later that evening, I made myself a simple dinner. Roasted sweet potatoes, grilled chicken, a glass of red wine I'd been saving for no special reason. Because sometimes the most special moments are the ones you don't announce. I ate slowly, deliberately. Not as a reward, but as a reminder. That I no longer had to earn the right to enjoy my own life. That I didn't need permission. Not from parents, not from the past, not even from the version of myself that still occasionally wondered, what if they change? Because maybe they will. Or maybe they won't. But either way, it won't change me. I've changed already. And that's enough. I sat at my desk that morning, sunlight stretching across the pages of my journal like a quiet invitation. The air outside was still cool, but the light had that warm, amber tint that only comes in the early hours of fall. Maple lay curled under the window, snoring softly, while a mug of tea cooled beside me. Everything felt still but not stuck. I opened to a fresh page, and without thinking too hard, I began to write. I am no longer the daughter of people who never truly saw me. The words came steady, no second-guessing, no apology in their shape. I am not the shadow in the family portraits, the afterthought at the dinner table, the name conveniently left off guest lists. I paused, letting the truth settle before continuing. I am Serena. I live at the edge of the woods, in a house with creaky floors and good light. I make my own coffee. I plant things. I laugh loudly when something is funny and cry quietly when it's not. I smiled as I wrote that. Because for so long I edited myself, even in private. Not anymore. Family, to me, is not a last name. It's not shared blood. It's not obligation wrapped in holiday bows. Family is presence. It's the people who ask nothing from me but truth, and give it back in return. I thought of Margot, of Nina, of Eli, of every moment in the last month that felt real in a way nothing ever did growing up. And then I wrote the final lines. I don't need to be accepted. I don't need to be forgiven. I choose myself. I choose this life. And for the first time ever, I am truly free. I put the pen down and closed the journal. Outside, a bird landed on the railing, small, brown, ordinary. A sparrow, maybe, or something close enough. It tilted its head toward me, then flew off into the morning. I didn't follow it with my eyes. I just let it go, and breathed in the quiet of a life that finally felt like it belonged to me. That evening, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and stepped out onto the porch just as the sun began to dip below the tree line. The light spilled across the yard in soft gold, catching on the leaves that had started turning orange at their edges. A breeze moved through the pines like a whisper, not urgent, not demanding, just present. Maple was already stretched out at the foot of the steps, head resting on her paws, eyes half closed but watching me like she always did. Quiet. Loyal. There. I sat in my usual spot on the wooden swing, one I'd sanded and painted myself just a few weeks earlier, and pulled the blanket around my legs. The tea steamed in my hands. I took a slow sip. It was the kind of peace that didn't need explaining. I had no more messages to check. No one I was hoping would call. No birthdays to pretend I forgot or holidays to brace myself for. Just me and the steady rhythm of a world that finally matched the one I'd been building inside. It took years to get here. Not miles, not money, not even time, but courage. The kind that doesn't come in big, dramatic declarations, but in quiet decisions made alone. The courage to stop trying to earn love from people who used it like currency. The courage to unlearn everything I was taught about duty and guilt and what a daughter is supposed to be. The courage to sit here now and feel full without needing a single thing to change. I watched the sun slide lower, casting long shadows across the yard. A sparrow landed on the railing, maybe the same one from this morning, maybe not. It hopped along the wood, completely at ease. For a moment we just shared the space, no need for meaning, no lesson to draw from it, just stillness. And then it took off again, wings catching the light just right, vanishing into the trees. I didn't wish to follow. I was exactly where I needed to be. Inside the house, the kettle clicked off with a soft pop. I didn't move. I just sat there, tea cooling in my hands, heart calm in my chest. There were no fireworks, no final moment, just the quiet understanding that I didn't have to go looking anymore, not for belonging, not for permission, not even for closure, because this ordinary evening with chipped mugs and tired dogs and a swing that creaks slightly when the wind shifts, was mine. Entirely, undeniably, enough. I smiled, not because something funny happened, not because someone finally saw me. I smiled because I did. I had found myself in the silence, in the stillness, in the spaces they never bothered to search, and for once I didn't feel like a missing piece. I felt whole, complete, free. Sometimes freedom doesn't come with a bang. It comes with a quiet moment on a porch swing. A decision to stop waiting for an apology. A cup of tea that tastes better simply because it was made for no one but yourself. This story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about choosing peace over permission. Because healing isn't about who hurt you, it's about who you become when you stop letting them. For years, I thought I had to be invited, welcomed, accepted. Turns out the most radical thing I ever did was walk away without slamming the door. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one left out, misunderstood, or quietly erased, let me say this to you now. You are not hard to love. You were just surrounded by people who didn't know how, and you don't need to wait for their understanding to begin your life. You can begin it now, right here, right where you are. Your peace doesn't require their approval. Your freedom doesn't need their permission. And your story? It's still being written, on your terms. So if this story touched something deep in you, share it. Let someone else know they're not alone in choosing themselves. Comment below if you've ever had to redefine what family means, and if you haven't yet, subscribe. Because this channel is where the quiet fighters live, the ones who leave the table and build their own. Like if you've ever walked away from a toxic relationship. Comment. If you're writing your own definition of family, subscribe. If you're ready to live free, not just accepted, your story matters, and you're not alone.